Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we tear through the stacks of articles and research you send us to distill the frameworks that really matter. Today we're on a pretty crucial mission, a deep dive into cultural intelligence, or CQ. And our goal here is to get way beyond just, avoiding offense. We want to extract the practical frameworks that let you engage with integrity, with effectiveness, across any cultural boundary. And that could be national, generational, even organizational. The one observation that jumped out from this entire stack of material was, well, it's really challenging to our modern instincts.
It really is.
It's that most failures in leadership, in mission, whatever, they don't start with a bad strategy.
No.
They start with a much quieter problem. We move too quickly from our conviction to our action.
Without pausing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Without first taking the time to understand how the people right in front of us actually see the world.
And that speed, that unexamined certainty is what all the literature points to as the main culprit.
Yeah.
That gap, if you don't look at it, is what fractures relationships. It's what stalls even the best ideas. So this idea of cultural intelligence, CQ, it's quickly becoming a non-negotiable.
Yeah.
At its core, the research we looked at defines it as the disciplined practice of humble learning before strategic action.
Humble learning. I like that phrase.
Yeah, and think about what that challenges. It goes against that deeply ingrained professional instinct that so many of us have.
The impulse to fix it.
The impulse to solve, fix, teach, or lead the second we see a problem, often before we've really listened.
Okay, but I have to ask the skeptical question here, the one I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds. Isn't that approach just terribly inefficient? I mean, in a world that rewards speed and just decisive action, doesn't slowing down to humbly learn put you at a disadvantage?
It really feels that way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But what we see over and over in the case studies is that confidence that races ahead of context, it almost always leads to a spectacular failure. And then you have these massive cleanup costs down the road. The sources are so clear on this. True effectiveness, it begins not with control, but with curiosity.
Not expertise, but empathy.
Exactly. Because here's the hard truth. Good intentions just don't translate automatically. What feels like a crystal clear directive to us
Yeah.
can easily be heard as arrogance or impatience or even dominance in another context.
So the goal isn't just to be sincere.
The goal is to be intelligible. Sincerity is crucial, but cultural intelligence is the discipline that ensures your actions are received as respectful, as trustworthy.
And without that, everything else just falls apart.
Trust erodes fast, and that's when strategies fail.
That sets the stage perfectly for this central challenge in the material, which is really about the difference between observation and understanding. We confuse them all the time. We see what people do, their clothes, their schedules, their customs, but we totally miss the underlying why.
And that's where the famous cultural iceberg analogy is just so helpful. So imagine an iceberg. The little tip you see above the water, that's the visible surface culture. It's the stuff you notice right away. The language, the food, the dress code, the rituals. And so often, leaders try to adjust only that layer.
It's like putting on the local team's jersey and saying, hey, I fit in.
Exactly that. But the real mass, the 90% that's submerged and invisible, that's the true meaning-making system. And that includes all these deep, often unconscious beliefs about things like honor and shame, about authority, about community, even about how time itself is experienced.
And those hidden things are what really drive behavior.
They're what shape what feels right or respectful or even dangerous, much more than any policy manual ever could.
So when we're talking about organizations trying to use this model, what's the biggest mistake? Where do they usually trip up?
It boils down to one thing: projection. The material calls it practicing projection.
Okay, what does that mean in practice?
It means when we see a behavior that makes us uncomfortable because it violates our own submerged cultural norms, we tend to project our moral framework right onto it.
So we moralize what's just different.
We moralize what's just cultural difference. Can I give you an example?
Please.
Okay, so imagine a leader from a very individualistic, task-focused culture. Punctuality is a virtue, schedules are everything. That leader might get incredibly frustrated with a team that consistently prioritizes, say, a crisis in their extended family over a project deadline. The leader might judge that behavior as irresponsibility or lack of commitment, maybe even sinful laziness.
Because their value is individual achievement and linear time.
Exactly. But the local culture might operate on a completely different system, a profound sense of communal identity, where the obligation to family is the highest possible value.
So the person isn't lazy.
They're not lazy at all. They're fulfilling a paramount cultural duty.
Right.
And misdiagnosing that as a moral failure, that's the definition of projection.
And the stakes are obviously so high. A cultural offense, even if you never intended it, can just poison relationships for years.
It creates barriers that are so much harder to fix than any logistical problem. It's the cost of love moving faster than listening.
So this moves us beyond just strategy. It becomes almost theological.
It really does, which is the perfect transition because this moves CQ from being just a soft skill to a core spiritual discipline. Because of the cost of love without learning is what the sources call unintended harm.
And there's a strong biblical case for this.
An incredibly strong case. The core argument is this. To misunderstand someone culturally and then to judge them morally anyway is a profound form of injustice. It's exactly what Scripture warns against. When Jesus says in John 7, do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. Right judgment requires accurate perception.
So it's not just about being fair, it's about being accurate, seeing the whole picture.
Absolutely. And you see this problem of unexamined confidence all through history. Romans 10.2 is the classic example. They have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge.
Zeal without knowledge.
It's destructive. Unexamined certainty always eclipses curiosity. And sincerity alone does not make up for poor listening or cultural domination.
You know, I really appreciate how the material reframes the story of Babel. We're often taught that it was a punishment for diversity.
Right, the diversity was the curse.
But the source argues the opposite. It says Babel was a judgment on uniformity driven by pride. They were trying to build one single identity, make a name for themselves.
Precisely. And that reframing makes the story of Pentecost in Acts 2 so much more powerful. The miracle there wasn't the elimination of different languages, it was their affirmation.
Everyone heard the gospel in our own tongues.
Oh, in their own tongues. So diversity isn't God's apology. It's evidence that God delights in difference, but without hierarchy.
So if that's the model, if curiosity is the method and diversity is the goal, what's the ultimate example of this? Is there a master blueprint for crossing these divides?
There is. And it's the Incarnation. The Incarnation is God's supreme act of cultural humility. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. God crossed the ultimate cultural divide, creator to creature, and the key is how he did it. He didn't just shout salvation down from heaven. He entered a specific culture, learned a local language, submitted to a Jewish context.
And he lived there for 30 years.
The 30 years before his public ministry even began. From a strategic point of view, it makes no sense. It's not efficient.
No.
But it was profoundly faithful. It modeled that presence and dwelling have to come before teaching and leading.
That really deepens the imperative. So let's get practical. Let's look at the tools. The sources point to 3 specific cultural frameworks that act like lenses for reading this hidden architecture.
Right. Let's start with framework 1, time orientation. This is a huge one. It's the difference between chronos and kairos.
Chronos and kairos.
Chronos is that linear, measurable, clock-driven time we often just assume is normal. Meetings start on the dot. Lateness is disrespect. The schedule is king. That's a very powerful but very specific cultural assumption. Kairos, on the other hand, it's opportune time. It's qualitative. Moments have relational or divine significance. An event begins when the right people are there or when the relational work is done.
And the conflict comes when you impose one on the other.
Exactly. When a Chronos leader imposes that rigidity on a Kairos culture, you show up at 9 a.m. sharp, ready to go, and your counterparts arrive at 9:30 because they were finishing an important conversation. The Chronos leader feels disrespected. The Kairos people feel like the visitor cares more about a clock than about them as people. You know, the material points out Jesus' ministry often followed Kairos. A delay wasn't a problem. It was a divine appointment.
So it shifts the blame from their being disrespectful to I am applying the wrong clock.
Precisely. Okay, framework 2, power, distance, and authority. This is about how societies perceive hierarchy.
High power distance versus low power distance.
Right. In high power distance cultures, which are very common globally, leaders are deferred to. Titles matter. And publicly disagreeing with a leader is seen as deeply shameful. But in low power distance cultures, think much of North America or Western Europe, we value egalitarianism. We expect debate. We want people to challenge the boss in a meeting.
This seems really tricky for anyone trying to implement a servant leadership model. If I try to be one of the team in a high power distance place, couldn't that backfire?
It absolutely can. The key here is making sure that servant leadership is culturally intelligible.
Meaning?
If you prematurely flatten the hierarchy, insist on first names, demand open debate, it can be seen as weak or disorganized, not humble. CQ helps leaders honor the local structure while still modeling servanthood in a way that makes sense there. Maybe it's through private consultation or asking for input one-on-one and then using your formal authority to act on that input.
That's a subtle but critical distinction. Okay, let's get to the last one. Framework 3, honor and shame dynamics.
Yes, and the sources say this is the dominant biblical worldview, but it's often ignored in our modern guilt innocence models.
Explain that.
In an honor-shame context, sin isn't just an individual legal failure, that's guilt. It's understood more as public disgrace, a loss of dignity, a break in belonging for the person and their whole family.
And if that's the operating system, how does it change the mission?
It changes everything. In a guilt model, you might preach public repentance to fix a legal standing. In an honor-shame culture, that exact same public act could be relationally devastating. It could make the person an outcast. The sources highlight that Jesus was a master at restoring honor. Think of the woman caught in adultery. He shielded her from public execution, which was total shame, while addressing the sin privately. He restored her dignity first.
So correction has to restore dignity, not amplify shame.
Yes, forgiveness is preached as the restoration of honor, not just private relief from guilt.
So we have these frameworks, and that takes us to the final transition. The material says we have to move beyond just adaptation to incarnation. How do you draw the line between those two?
Adaptation is a good start, but at surface level. Adaptation asks, how can I adjust my behavior to function here?
Yeah.
You change your schedule, you change your clothes. It's accommodation.
It's necessary but not sufficient.
Exactly. Incarnation asks a much deeper question. How can I dwell here? And dwelling requires long-term commitment, shared suffering, and, critically, mutual transformation. It's what Paul meant in 1 Corinthians 9. I have become all things to all people. That wasn't manipulation. It was sacrificial self-emptying. It was fidelity to the message, but without cultural domination.
And from that posture, you get that core sequence you mentioned earlier.
Yes. The sequence that flows from presence, not just strategy. It's this. Love precedes instruction, and trust precedes teaching. Incarnational CQ means you allow the community to shape you as much as you hope to shape it.
Yeah.
You're not just there to deposit information. You're there to learn, to be present, to live alongside people. The real work takes root in that relational soil.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the core takeaway for you, the listener, is this. Cultural intelligence is not some abstract skill for international travel. It is a moral, a spiritual obligation. It trains you to see what's beneath the surface, to distinguish between genuine sin and mere cultural difference, to judge with right judgment.
And that ties right back to the ultimate challenge from the sources. CQ is obedience that's shaped by humility. The biggest obstacle to any meaningful connection is confidence that assumes it already understands. We're called to engage with the humility of knowing that God is already at work in the culture we're entering. So consider this, and this is the provocative thought we want to leave you with. How might your leadership, your ministry, your engagement, how might it be transformed if understanding became your first non-negotiable act of obedience, instead of a secondary thing you get to once the strategy is already failing?
That's a powerful question. The future of effective engagement might depend less on how clearly we speak and far more on how deeply we learn to listen. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.